This happened to my wife and me last year. We had been planning a weekend hiking trip for weeks, eager to escape the noise of the city and immerse ourselves in the quiet, untamed wilderness. We picked a well-known but lightly trafficked trail that led to a secluded lake where we intended to camp for the night. We arrived early in the morning, our backpacks stuffed with supplies, and after checking our gear one last time, we set out on the trail. The first few hours were peaceful, just the two of us, the crunch of leaves beneath our boots, and the occasional distant rustling of animals hidden in the brush. About halfway to our campsite, we stopped for lunch at a small clearing. That's when we met him, a lone hiker sitting on a fallen log, sipping from a metal water bottle. He was in his late 30s, maybe early 40s, with an unshaven face and a faraway look in his eyes. When he noticed us, he gave a small nod and forced a smile, but there was something off. He told us his name was Eric and that he had been hiking these trails for years, but the way he spoke felt uneasy, like he was distracted or thinking about something else. My wife, ever the friendly one, struck up a conversation with him, asking about the trail conditions ahead and whether he was camping too. He hesitated before answering, then muttered something about heading to the lake to meet a friend. We chatted for a few more minutes before saying our goodbyes. I couldn't shake the feeling that something about Eric's demeanor wasn't right, but I brushed it off. People come to the woods to escape, after all. Maybe he was just lost in thought. We made it to the lake by late afternoon, pitched our tent, and set up a small fire. The forest around us was thick, the kind that swallows sound, making everything eerily quiet once the sun dipped below the horizon. That's when we heard it. A scream, distant but blood-curdling. My wife and I froze. We exchanged looks, listening hard, but the forest had returned to its eerie silence. I told myself it could have been an animal, a fox or a mountain lion, but my gut said otherwise. An hour passed, then two. We tried to relax, convincing ourselves it was nothing. But sometime after midnight, we heard footsteps circling our campsite. Slow, deliberate. I held my breath, straining my ears. The steps stopped. Then, a whisper. We couldn't make out the words, but it sent ice through my veins. I grabbed the flashlight and shone it toward the sound. Nothing. The trees stood still, empty. But we weren't alone. We barely slept that night. At first light, we packed up and hurried back down the trail, our nerves on edge. When we reached the halfway point, the same clearing where we had met Eric, something was different. His backpack was there, lying open on the ground, his water bottle, half empty, but no Eric. My wife called out his name, but the only response was the rustling of leaves in the wind. A sinking feeling settled in my gut. Something had happened to him. We picked up our pace, practically jogging back to the car. When we reached the ranger station, we told them everything. They didn't seem surprised. One of them, an older man with a serious face, just nodded. "You're not the first ones to ask about Eric," he said. "But the thing is, Eric went missing 5 years ago." I felt my stomach drop. "What?" The ranger sighed, rubbing his temples. "He disappeared on this trail. Some say he got lost. Others think something else happened, but his body was never found." My wife and I just stared at each other, speechless. We got in the car and drove home in silence. But to this day, I can't stop thinking about that night, about the scream, about the whispers, and about the man we met in the woods, the hiker who never came back. I was camping on the edge of a dense forest near my uncle's cabin. He owned a lot of land, and since he rarely visited, he let me use the place whenever I wanted. I had always loved the idea of solo camping, just me, the fire, and the quiet sounds of nature. That night, the air was crisp, and the sky was perfectly clear. I had set up my tent just a short walk from the cabin in a small clearing surrounded by towering pines. I spent most of the evening by the fire, listening to the distant hoots of an owl and the occasional rustling of small animals in the underbrush. It was peaceful. At least it was at first. Around midnight, I heard something strange, a faint crunching sound coming from the woods. At first, I assumed it was just a deer or some other animal moving through the trees. But the longer I listened, the more I realized the footsteps were deliberate, slow and heavy, and they were getting closer. I turned off my flashlight and sat completely still, barely breathing. The footsteps stopped just at the edge of the clearing, beyond the glow of my dying fire. I strained my eyes, but I couldn't see anything past the darkness of the trees. Then a whisper, low and raspy. "I see you." My entire body tensed. It wasn't my imagination. Someone was out there watching me. I grabbed the hatchet I had brought with me and slowly backed toward my tent, trying not to make a sound. The forest had gone completely silent. No insects, no wind, nothing. Just a deep, unnatural stillness. Then, out of nowhere, something ran, full speed, straight at my campsite. I barely had time to react before I saw a shadowy figure emerge from the trees, sprinting right toward me. I panicked and bolted for the cabin, leaving everything behind. My heart pounded as I fumbled with the keys, finally managing to throw open the door and slam it shut behind me. For a few moments, everything was quiet. Then, scratching. Slow, deliberate scratching at the door. I held my breath and peered out through the small window. In the pale moonlight, I could see the figure standing just beyond the porch, facing the cabin. I couldn't make out any features, just a tall, gaunt silhouette. Then it took a step forward, and another. It pressed its face against the glass. I stumbled back. The eyes, they weren't normal. They were wide, unblinking, and completely black. I scrambled to grab my phone and call the police, but as soon as I looked up again, the figure was gone. The authorities arrived about 20 minutes later, but they found nothing. No footprints, no signs that anyone had been there at all. Just my abandoned campsite and the fire that had burned itself out. I didn't sleep that night. In fact, I haven't gone camping alone since. I don't know who or what was in those woods that night, but one thing still haunts me to this day. When I finally worked up the courage to go back and pack up my things the next morning, I found something carved into the side of my tent. Next time, don't run. For years, I had been hiking the deep forest trails of a national park a few hours from my home. The drive was peaceful, the kind of solitude I had come to appreciate. This time, I was venturing farther than ever before. An old, forgotten trail a ranger had once mentioned in passing. It wasn't on any official map, but that only made it more intriguing. I parked near the ranger station, signed in my planned route, and set off with my pack. The air was thick with the scent of pine and damp earth, the only sounds coming from birds and the occasional rustling in the underbrush. It was supposed to be a 3-day trip, and I was eager to see the untouched beauty of the wilderness. But I had no idea what I was walking into. By the second evening, I had reached a narrow canyon with steep, jagged cliffs on either side. As the sun dipped below the trees, I found a suitable clearing to set up camp. The night was still, eerily so. No wind, no distant animal sounds, just silence. I convinced myself it was just my mind playing tricks after a long hike. Then, deep into the night, I woke up with a start. A sound, soft, almost like footsteps, crunched through the leaves outside my tent. My pulse pounded in my ears. I reached for my flashlight, hesitated for a moment, then unzipped the tent door. Nothing. Just the endless trees, shadows twisting in the pale moonlight. I told myself it was an animal, some curious deer, and tried to go back to sleep, but I never truly did. Morning came and I shook off the unease. I packed up my gear and prepared for the next stretch of my journey. That's when I noticed something strange. The trail was gone. The well-trodden path I had been following had completely vanished. The undergrowth was thick and untouched, as if no one had ever walked through it. My stomach tightened. I turned back toward the way I had come, but it was the same. Dense trees, no trail, no sign of my own footprints from the day before. Panic set in. I took out my map and compass, but no matter how I turned them, nothing made sense. I tried retracing my steps, but it only led me deeper into the woods, further from any landmarks I recognized. It was as if the forest itself had shifted overnight. Then I saw it. A figure, standing motionless between the trees, just far enough away that I couldn't make out the details. It didn't move, didn't make a sound, just watched. My breath caught in my throat. I called out, but there was no response. I took a cautious step forward, and in the blink of an eye, the figure was gone. I didn't waste another second. I turned and ran, branches whipping against my face, roots threatening to trip me with every step. My lungs burned, my mind screamed, but I didn't stop. Not until I saw it, an old fire watchtower rising above the trees in the distance. Summoning every last bit of strength, I sprinted toward it. The wooden stairs creaked under my weight as I scrambled to the top. From there, I finally saw something familiar, the faint glimmer of the ranger station miles away. I radioed for help, barely able to get the words out. Hours later, they found me, shaken, dehydrated, and with no clear explanation of what had happened. When I told the rangers about the Vanishing Trail, about the figure, they exchanged uneasy glances. Then one of them spoke. Years ago, a hiker disappeared out there. He was never found. Some say the woods don't let you leave once they take an interest in you. To this day, I don't know how I found my way out or what I saw that night. But sometimes, when I close my eyes, I still see the figure standing there, just watching. I never went back to that forest.